Hey guys, welcome to Horror 5. This is the channel that's going to be traveling state to state, working together, uncovering crazy stories and weird things that have happened in each state. Now, if you're interested in anything crazy, odd, mysterious, murders, criminal activity, anything like that, definitely leave a like, subscribe, because I'm going to go through every single state. And I'm going to start in the order in which the states became ratified. Now, if you want to wait for your state to come up, then you never know. You never know what could actually happened in your town, near your house. I learned some pretty crazy stuff while doing this, just from this first episode. So let's take this journey together. Buckle up, sit down, and hold tight.
The suspect is armed and considered extremely dangerous. 911, what's your emergency? We have a call back for 86 in 2 seconds.
So the first person we're actually going to be talking about is none other than Delaware's own serial killer, Stephen Brian Pennell, the Route 40 killer. So, Stephen Pennell was actually born November 22nd, 1957. He shocked this small state, becoming one of the only serial killers to actually operate throughout Delaware and Delaware solely. So, he was known as the Route 40 killer or the Route 13 killer. November 29th, 1987, around 6 p.m., a Wilmington woman left her hospital. She was a nurse. She worked there after a long shift. She was trying to make it home. She ended up catching a ride, only to be discovered later that day by two boys alongside the road in a ditch. She had been beaten. She was partially unclothed, but there was no sexual assault evident. So the killer actually ended her life with a final blow to the head with a hammer with strangulation. The second victim was Catherine DeMauro. She was actually a 31-year-old sex worker. June 28th, 1988, 7 months after the first gruesome murder, she was seen walking down Route 40. But at 6:25 a.m., construction workers found her naked body. Again, no signs of sexual assault, but she had the same exact marks, same strangulation. She was beaten, and the final blow was delivered with a hammer. Now, there was something different about Catherine. They had actually found a bunch of blue fibers all over her body, but that's all they found. So, the Special Forces and the FBI actually worked together. They put up a 60-person team in a sting operation posing as sex workers. So they were attempting to find more information, trying to find any types of lead, any types of suspects, anything at all, but came up with nothing. But on August 22nd, 1988, only a short time after the second murder of Catherine, Margaret Lynn Finner was a 27-year-old sex worker. She went missing. There was actually multiple witnesses this time that seen Finner entering a blue Ford driven by a white male near Route 13. Unfortunately, 3 months later, her body was actually found floating in the Chesapeake, Delaware Canal. It was so decomposed, there was no cause of death that could be determined. It was just, there was nothing. But it would be pretty obvious to say she met the same grisly fate. There were also two more murders. Michelle Gordon, who was 22 years of age, she was seen entering a blue Ford. September 20th, her body was discovered on the rocks in Chesapeake, Delaware Canal. It was discovered she was drugged with cocaine, causing her heart to stop, and she was tortured after death. On September 23rd, Catherine Meyer from Brookmount Farms, who was 26-year-old, went missing. A police officer actually saw her enter a blue Ford on Route 40 and wrote the license plate down, which turned out to be Brian Pennell's car. Unfortunately, her body was never found. But September 14th, one of the undercover police officers roamed Route 40 in hopes of reaching a suspect. She had seen a blue Ford 7 times, and she went to a more secluded area, and the white male attempted to get her to enter his vehicle. She refused, saying that she was too tired, but noticed that the blue car had blue carpet. She actually managed to tear some of those fibers and wrote down the plate number. After some investigation, it was seemed to be believed the car belonged to Stephen Brian Pennell, who was 31 years old, married, father of 2, but had no criminal record. Prosecutors actually approved a search warrant of the van, and upon inspection, they found prints matching the blood, the hair of the victims, as well as the tape that was used for tomorrow. They also found a torture kit. It had pliers, whips, handcuffs, needles, knives, and restraints. Pennell was actually arrested 1 year after murdering his first victim on November 29, 1988. He was charged with 3 murders. Pennell actually refused all interviews until close to his execution. He interviewed with only 1 newspaper, but unfortunately, he didn't reveal anything at all. Nothing new. And he never revealed the location of the last body. March 14th, 1992 at 9:49 p.m., he was executed via lethal injection. He was actually the first person in Delaware executed in 46 years and the 165th to be executed in the U.S. since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. He was 34 years of age. Now, this one is pretty crazy. Being a Delaware resident and being big into history like myself, and really, I would have thought that I would have heard something about this, but I mean, I guess the history books kind of etched this one out. They didn't want to talk about it, and they didn't want Delaware to be kind of condemned as this place. So Patty Cannon was actually known as the slave murderer and kidnapper. Now, most of the history books are going to skip over this one, but Patty Cannon was definitely alive, and more than anything, sick and twisted. Patty was born around the 1760s, and she was an illegal slave trader and the co-leader of the Cannon-Johnson gang of Delaware, Maryland. This group operated for nearly a decade in the early 19th century. They kidnapped free African Americans and fugitive slaves and sold them to the South into slavery. This actually became known as the Reverse Underground Railroad. Patty was married to a local farmer, Jesse Cannon, in southern Delaware on the border of Maryland and Sussex County, and they had at least 1 daughter. She was twice married to men known to be engaged in slave stealing and kidnapping. After the first husband was captured and sentenced to death, she remarried to Joe Johnson, who actually became Patty's partner in crime. In May of 1822, Joe Johnson was sentenced to pillory and 39 lashings. Cannon and several other gang members who were actually charged with Johnson, apparently they were not prosecuted. But in 1829, the bodies of 4 African Americans, including 3 children, were discovered on the property which Patty Cannon owned in southern Delaware. A tenant farmer had uncovered them while plowing. April 1829, Patty Cannon was indicted on 4 counts of murder by a grand jury of 24 white males. The bodies found were an infant female, a male child, an adult male, and a small boy. Cannon had James, a mixed man who she purchased when he was just 7 years old, grew up on the farm, and actually participated in her crimes, a lot of times serving as a decoy to make the free African Americans feel safe working with him. Cannon actually admitted to almost 24 murders of kidnapped victims, and she died in prison awaiting trial. She died in her cell in Georgetown, Delaware, and it is believed to be suicide by poison on May 11th, 1829. Now this is really crazy because I mean you really have to think about the time period and like the investigations and everything like that. I mean, this is back before forensics. This is back before everything. You know what I mean? It's not just you send it to a lab, you test it, and boom, it's done. There's not really missing people. I mean, That was a very prolific thing back in the day, was to capture free men and then sell them as slaves. And as wrong as it is, a lot of people did it. And Delaware was kind of that in-between state where it was like, hey, we're Union, but if you go to a certain place, there's some Confederates here. So it was a choice that they made, which was disgusting. But anyways, she was buried in a graveyard of Georgetown, but before that land was actually developed as a parking lot, her remains were actually exhumed and reburied in Potter's Field near that new jail. Her skull was actually separated from the rest of her body, and the skull was actually given to Dover Public Library, and later it was given to the Smithsonian in 2010 because they wanted to do research on that time period and how they lived and so on and so forth. Historical markers were actually placed at the site in Reliance, Maryland, known as the Patty Cannon House. And in 2012, more markers were put up, adding and explaining the gruesome horrors that were committed by Patty Cannon and the gang. A housing development actually was established in 1973, and it stands on the Delaware side of the Nanticoke River. And in some cruel twist, they named it the Patty Cannon Estates. I'm not 100% sure if that's still there. I'm actually going to be looking it up right after this, because if it's still the Patty Cannon Estates, I mean, nothing should really be named after that. So here's another one that really hits close to home, not because I live close, but because I've been there so many times. It's a murder at Lums Pond. So Lums Pond is a very nice pond. It has tons of trails, wilderness, and not even to mention, there's a lot of fishing there. There's, you know what I mean? There's a bunch of bass, and it's just a good time. Lums Pond was actually named after John Lum and his son. The pair had worked on the mill on the C&D Canal. And oddly enough, it's been explained by people that have tried to find this sound. They could never find it. There was water wheels running, and it was such a common thing. A bunch of visitors would try and chase the sound, but every time, the closer they got, they didn't find anything. They found nothing at all. No wheels, no nothing. Many strange things can actually be attributed to Lums Pond, including slaves, who they never made it to freedom along the Underground Railroad, which had stops at Lums Pond. And people sometimes hear apparitions and sounds coming from these poor souls still searching for their peace. Let alone that, there was actually another thing that was kind of wild that people have actually claimed. Around the 1870s, a young woman actually ran from her home and sought shelter behind Lums Pond. But in a grim twist of fate, that's where she ran into an unidentified man who not only assaulted her, but raped and brutally murdered her right near Lums Pond Swamp Trail. Unfortunately, the murderer was never apprehended, the case was left cold, and to this day, no one knows the identity of the murderer. But it's been said if you go there, muffled screams and high-pitched pleas can still be heard when there's no noise behind Lums Pond. Now, this is another wild one because I have actually been here when I was younger, and I'm sure a lot of Delawareans have been there or heard of it or whatever the case may be, but I don't think a lot of them know the actual stuff that went down. It's actually terror at Fort Delaware, the captive Confederate soldiers. So during the Civil War, Pea Patch Island, there's Fort Delaware. It was being used as a POW camp for Confederate prisoners of war. During the war, and it was later used as gun storage and keeping the port of Wilmington and Philadelphia safe during the Spanish-American War. Many of these POWs were captured from hellacious battles. I mean, you're talking like the battles of Gettysburg. But anyways, the man in charge of this fort during that period was General Alvin F. Schoaf. But he was better known to the Confederates as General Terror, and you'll understand why shortly. During this period, there was normally 13,000 prisoners kept in wooden barracks, It's way above capacity. So you got to imagine it's cramped. It's a tight space. I mean, you're trying to move around. There's way too many people. Let alone that, but you're running into a lot of different issues of people being so tightly packed together. The conditions there were just deplorable. The food was scarce, water was dirty, and the prisoners were actually being tortured. They were even tortured to the point that soldiers would throw live rats into that scene of prisoners who all scrambled trying to grab the rats and eat them just so they can have a warm meal. All the while the soldiers were being laughed at. Malnutrition ran rampant, and not to mention scurvy, smallpox. But many of the 2,700 men who died at Fort Delaware haunt the place, trying to tell about the conditions that they were in. Pea Patch Island is now a tourist attraction, and oddly enough, a very popular trip among schools. I've never personally been there on a school trip, but I have been there on a trip on my own, and they didn't mention any of this. And actually, the people there really downplay how everything really went down. They just kind of say, hey, they were kept here, it happened, it's not that bad. But it really makes you think about like the laws and the rules of present day soldiers and POWs, what you're allowed and what you're not allowed to do, and it really makes you think about that kind of stuff. Currently, there's a lot of paranormal investigators and tourist tours for the paranormal that you can visit almost every room there, if you're up for taking a trip, and a truly haunted place. And speaking to these poor souls trapped within Fort Delaware, and take a visit, see for yourself. So I left this story for last simply because it's literally 5 minutes away from my house. Not even 5 minutes. I could probably, it's like a stone's throw away from my house. So this one is Jane Pritchard, the Blackbird Forest murder. Now, Jane Pritchard was actually a 28-year-old biology graduate from the University of Maryland. She was a botanist. But September 20th, 1986, she drove to Blackbird Forest in Delaware. She was working on her master's, and she was actually studying the wild hog peanut for her master's. At 7 a.m., she parked her 1980 Chevy Blazer, got out, and got to work. But, unfortunately, at 5:30 p.m., her body was discovered by two New Jersey campers. She was partially nude, not too far from her gear, and she had a single shotgun wound in her back. There was actually a hunter who came forward the next day and said that he saw her speaking with another hunter at around 10 a.m. And there was actually a sketch made. He pinpointed details about this person. He gave a pretty clear picture. But he was arrested, and he was actually charged with the murder of Jane Pritchard. But of course, the case fell through. There were no charges made, and in August 1987, it was due to DNA testing, which was actually a very new thing, of a hair that they had found at the scene. The crime was described as a crime of opportunity, which basically means that there was no real motivation behind it, no personal gain. It wasn't like sought out. It was just, hey, you're in front of me, I'm gonna kill someone and get away with it. Kind of one of those things. So there was actually such a low amount of evidence that it baffled investigators. So there was only one single hair, and that was a hair that actually cleared the hunter of any wrongdoing. There was nearly 300 interviews done, but still left without a lead, without a motive, without any evidence. So in 2015, the case officially went cold. Then there was a cold case team that reopened the case to crack it, and Jane's family was excited. They finally wanted to get some closure, but nothing came up. They investigated it, nothing new happened, and to this day, the killer of Jane Pritchard has never been found and could still be out there. Now that personally is pretty crazy to me, just how close that I am to Blackbird Forest and how many times I've been there and went camping there and never thought like, hey, someone could have gotten murdered here. Never thought about that kind of thing until I did research, and I came across other murders that were close. There was a guy that escaped from prison, broke into a woman's house and killed her. It's some horrible stuff, but this one really kind of struck me because, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. That person could still be around. It could still be in the town that I live in. And to me, that's the craziest thing of all. But hey, I want to thank you guys so much for making it to the end. If you guys enjoyed it, please leave a like, subscribe, share it, send me a message, write a comment. I'm going to read everything, and reach out to me personally. I'll message you back. If you guys have any tips, anything that I got wrong, just let me know, and I'll be sure to fix it. Thank you guys so much.